world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe, Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortune he has seen, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
주체의 사회 주의를 우리 어떻게 정대로 지키는가를 세계여 보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 백승의 영도 따라서 전군의 붉은 기 그 신념으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 주체의 강성대국을 우리 어떻게 이 땅에 세우는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님의 국의 뜻을 받들어 불굴의 정신력 그 배짱으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다.
Vietnam brûle et moi je hurle Mao, Mao. Johnson rigole et moi je vole Mao, Mao. Le napalm coule et moi je roule Mao, Mao. Les villes crèvent et moi je rêve Mao, Mao. Les putains crient et moi je ris Mao, Mao. Le riz est fou et moi je joue Mao, Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
L'impérialisme dicte partout sa loi. La révolution n'est pas un dîner. La bomba est un tigre en papier. Les masses sont les véritables héros. Les ricains tuent et moi je mue Mao, Mao. Les fous sont rois et moi je bois Mao, Mao. Les bombes tonnent et moi je sonne Mao, Mao. Les bébés fuient et moi je fuis Mao, Mao. Les Russes mangent et moi je danse Mao, Mao. Diable dénonce, je renonce Mao, Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
La base de l'armée, c'est le soldat. Le vrai pouvoir est au bout du fusil. Les monstres seront tous anéantis. L'ennemi ne périt pas de lui-même. Mao, Mao. Mao, Mao. Mao, Mao. Mao, Mao.
When I was young, I used to be as fine a man as ever you'd see in the Prince of Wales. He said to me, come and join the British Army. Tee-oo-ra-loo-ra-loo-ra-loo, they're looking for monkeys up in the zoo. It says, one, if I had a face like you, I'd join the British Army. Sarah Connan baked a cake, and so for poor old Slattery sake, sure I threw myself into the lake, pretending I was barmy. Tee-oo-ra-loo-ra-loo-ra-loo, I've made me mind up what to do. Now I'll work me ticket home to you and the British Army. Sergeant Healy went away and his wife got in the family way, and the only words that she could say was blame the British Army. Tee-oo-ra-loo-ra-loo-ra-loo, me curse upon the Labour Blue that took me darling boy from me to join the British Army. Corporal Sheen is a terrible note, just give him a couple of jars of stout and he beat the enemy with his mouth and saved the British Army. Tee-oo-ra-loo-ra-loo-ra-loo, I've made me mind up what to do. Now I'll work me ticket home to you and the British Army.
Ich trage eine Fahne und diese Fahne ist rot. Es ist die Arbeiterfahne, die Vater trug durch die Not. Die Fahne ist niemals gefallen, so oft auch der Träger fiel. Sie weht heute über uns allen und sieht schon der Sehnsucht Ziel. Ich trage eine Fahne, das Rot der Arbeiter macht. Es hat die Arbeiterfahne bei Nacht mein Vater bewacht und hat sie mir früh übergeben, als Morgenrot stieg empor, dass wir sie zur Sonne heben, bei Tag in der Kampfe schwor. Ich trage eine Fahne und diese Fahne ist rot. Es ist die Arbeiterfahne, die uns die
веселый раз. Эй, ухнем, еще разик, еще раз. Разовьем мы березу, разовьем мы кудряву. Ой да дай да, ой да дай да, разовьем мы кудряву.
Новостях в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 20th of February 2025. Here we are again with another stream. First of all, allow me to begin this particular broadcast by apologizing for the sound fuck up on yesterday's episode of Decline and Fall. The reason for that I have yet to discern. Clearly, something went wrong with the recording, and the clips we were using didn't show up. Now, you may say that not having a clip of George Monbiot and Paul Mason is actually a positive bonus for the program, but we were using their ranting and raving to illustrate a point, and we probably illustrated it anyway, but it would have been better if you could have heard the actual audio. So what I'll be doing is sorting out a new audio version ASAP, so the proper audio can be restored to it, and so hopefully get that sorted out well by the end of today, ideally. So here we are, and we are discussing, as the title suggests, the fate of a certain Vladimir Zelensky. Vladimir Alexandrovich Zelensky, my memory. Shame that we share a name that's of some variety or another. Anyway, a certain Mr. Zelensky, a moderately successful comedian, as Donald Trump has called him, looks as if he is coming to the end of the road as the duly designated imperial plenipotentiary for the country that used to be called Ukraine. Now, if you've not been following this, the story with regard to Ukraine has been developing very quickly. Now, this goes to the heart of why Donald Trump is back as president, and why it is that the U.S. ruling class, or at least a powerful faction therein, have decided to pull the plug on the Ukraine project, because this is something which has obviously gone wrong. We have covered here over the course of really almost 2 years now on the YouTube side just what the intentions of the imperialists were when they launched this project 30 years ago, really. It was 30 years ago that they began their influencing operations. 21 years ago that they had their first attempt at turning Ukraine into a neo-colony. Didn't quite succeed the first time around. Were much more ruthless and much more thoroughgoing with their suppression of opposition the second time around, and therefore succeeded. Now, as we have talked about many times, it will be the epitaph of Zelensky, of course, that here is a man who, of course, has sold Ukraine quite literally to the highest bidder. But in that sense, he's hardly alone. Ukrainian crooked bourgeois politicians have been a thing, the dominant party in Ukraine since Ukraine became independent. The entire political structure of Ukraine was born crooked, and it will die crooked. This is not a reflection on Ukrainians, on the Ukrainian worker. It is a reflection on the comprador and counter-revolutionary scum who took over Ukraine upon the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Were decent people who ran the Ukrainian SSR. Gorbachev sidelined them or fired them, both. And so you end up with people like Kravchuk, Kushma, Yanukovych, who wasn't all that much better, a pretty fucking useless leader, to be honest. A man who was cooed out twice and didn't take any precautions, apparently, to guard himself against the possibility of. The man unworthy of any respect, to be honest with you. Whose weakness, corruption, and failure to actually lead a coherent political project in Ukraine, failure to learn even from the lessons that were available right next door in the form of Lukashenko's rule in Belarus, failure to learn anything, and as a consequence of which was betrayed by all of his so-called partners in the West. As soon as he objected to one thing, he was gone, and was unable to rally any support behind himself, and fled into an exile in Russia, from which he will probably never return. So the project that the US has been involved with, and the British, has been running for over 30 years. Zelensky and his reign have been the culmination of it. Ukraine, though, was sold to the West many, many years before Zelensky even turned up. Their hold over it has intensified, but the selling of Ukraine to the West took place many years before Zelensky came on the scene, when he was merely a comedian, tap dancing away and playing the piano with his penis for the edification of Kolomoisky and other oligarchs. Now, Zelensky is facing now what happens to every imperial stooge in running a regime which is no longer required. And the Ukrainian regime is now surplus to requirements. The US can't get its money back, no matter what Trump says. That's just a good piece of propaganda to throw out to his electoral base, who have been rightly riled up by the amount of money being pumped into Ukraine, whilst large areas of the United States fall to pieces. Now, the way in which we should see Zelensky, of course, in the same way you hear figure like Hamid Karzai or Ashraf Ghani, both of whom the PR industry of London attempted to do a number on to sort of buff up and burnish their image, and that, of course, failed. But they really tried to do a number with Zelensky, and of course, because he is an actor by training, of course, they managed to do a lot more with him. Zelensky was initially elected on the platform of ending what was at that stage a civil war within the borders of post-1991 Ukraine, triggered by the fascist coup of 2014 and the violent suppression of opposition that followed it. And it was an uprising in the east started by the workers of Donbass and aided by large-scale defections from the pre-existing Ukrainian army. Zelensky, in 2019, when he was first elected, came in saying that he was going to end it and make peace and implement the Minsk agreement. Zelensky failed to do this. In fact, he did the exact opposite. Now, herein is a matter of controversy amongst, especially perhaps amongst those who would describe themselves as multipolar. So how much of this is purely Zelensky's fault and how much of this is him falling into line behind orders that came from Washington and London? Well, the principal blame for the situation Ukraine finds itself in does lie with the imperialists, but also they wouldn't be able to do it without the comprador scum that make up the Ukrainian political leader, including Zelensky. Zelensky, if he was at all sincere in his desire to make peace, all the way back in 2019, would have actually gone about it in a more serious way. He would have made an appeal to the Ukrainian people. He would have been straight with them about the pressures that he was under from the so-called Western partners. He would have been clear to them about the role that the Banderists were playing. Of course, he didn't do any of that. He faced opposition. He did face intimidation. He immediately crumbled and did what his masters told him to. He clung to the protection offered by the US and the British, because I think it's a fair bet that the Banderists did threaten to kill him. I think that's pretty clear that they did, or at least they intimated that they'd be prepared to do so. And so Zelensky, when confronted with this, reversed course and became a president that was vigorously prosecuting the war in the east of Ukraine as it was then, and failing to win it, of course. Excuse me. So the biggest sin of Zelensky is that he not only reversed course on his promises, but that he did so in such a way that guaranteed the maximum amount of Ukrainian deaths. By that I mean he was offered a way out in 2022. The Russians were very gave the appearance of being generous to Zelensky and allowing him to, of course, stay in power, just saying that he had to accept that Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk were gone, Crimea was gone, and that he had to drop the anti-Russian measure. Now, had Zelensky agreed to the Istanbul Agreement that was initialed back in 2022, where would we be now, is the interesting question. So, would Zelensky be still around? The answer is probably not. The answer is if he'd have signed that, somebody would have killed him. I don't have any doubt about that. Who that somebody would be, well, the candidates are many, and you can run through a few of them. The first and most obvious candidates for his potential assassination would be the Banderist, who would be furious if he had signed the peace agreement in. The next and most obvious candidates are, of course, his imperial partners, or more accurately, I should say his employers, the British, and the US principally. They would be incredibly angry had he let them down, and they would have withdrawn their protection from him, which is, by the way, why he's still in power and why he's still alive. Plenty of the Banderites would have happily put a bullet in his head years ago, but he was the one who was held up as the war leader. He was the one whose image was on every magazine. He is the one whose faction has portrayed him and Yermak, his sort of Cardinal Richelieu figure, as being the ones who could bring in the bacon from the imperialist sponsors. Wonder where that 100-odd billion's gone. Well, it's been filtered into the bank accounts of the Ukrainian elite. It's been used for payoffs. Recently, Zelinsky went down to the UAE when he was not allowed into the summit between the Russians and the Americans. And there is well-informed speculation from Ukrainian channels that the reason why he was going there was to organize a vast transit of funds out of Ukraine over to the UAE, where from there they could be moved on elsewhere. So it seems that Zelensky knows his time is up, and so do those around him. The only thing that they are probably trying to barter for now is an exit that involves, well, getting out alive and not being hung upside down from a lamppost riddled with machine gun bullets, Mussolini style. So clearly, him, Yermak, and others are preparing to run with as much loot as they can either carry. I mean, they said that Ashraf Ghani left Afghanistan with a briefcase stuffed full of $5 million in notes. Whether Zelensky will go out in quite such a way, I'm not sure. But certainly it seems he is making preparations for his exile. The rumor is, and this is a persistent rumor that's been around for 3 years now, that he's guarded by British special forces, which of course is partially about the British keeping their asset alive, and considering he's under threat not from the Russians, who have no real reason to kill him, given the almighty bollocks that he's making of war, but from the Banderists. And as long as Zelensky has had the backing of the US and the British in particular, then he was relatively safe. The Banderists are, of course, under the command of elements within the Ukrainian comprador bourgeoisie. They are a faction who obey orders. And as long as the paymasters were saying that Zelensky was the guy, they were duty bound to respect that. And as soon as he's not the guy bringing in the billions of dollars in bribes and payoffs and hush money, then, well, his position starts to look incredibly precarious, because an imperial stooge is only useful to his uneasy allies if, again, he's bringing in the money. If he's not bringing in the money and he's not got the protection of the overlord anymore, then he's not long for this world. And this is why we get to Trump this week basically signaling just that. He's done with Zelensky. There's a reason why Trump put out that post on Truth Social calling Zelensky a dictator, saying that he was responsible for war, or responsible for prolonging the war, I should say. And the reason why Trump has done that is or whoever is writing that particular tweet. Remember, Trump doesn't write all of his own tweets or social media posts. There's a team of them who work on this. And so Trump putting that out isn't just Trump getting petty and blowing off steam, though that's probably part of it. Zelensky gave a press conference or made a number of comments that annoyed Trump. But it's a calculated strategy from Trump's team, because they know that should they send the signal to the various factions in Kiev that Zelensky ain't the man anymore, that Zelensky's not long for this world. Now, he still has the backing of the London government, led by the hapless Sir Keir Starmer, as we discussed yesterday on the episode of Decline and Fall. But that doesn't count for much. because you see, London can still move around some money, but London's got no muscle. The emperor is naked and ancient, and his bones have turned to dust, in the case of British imperialism. So Starmer is nominally sticking with Zelensky, but again, if you look in the British press, even though they're howling and screaming and stamping their feet, some of the more cynical of them, some of the more far-sighted of them, have realized that the game is over, and it'd be best if the British got out before the shit hit the fan, and therefore avoided getting the blame. And so don't be surprised if the British position, when it becomes clear that the Trump team have made up their minds to reorient themselves towards potential wars on Iran, or maybe even something involving China, then don't be surprised if the London government suddenly changes course, suddenly Zelensky drops out of the headlines, suddenly everything goes quiet on the Ukraine front, and Zelensky is betrayed and disappears. Or goes into exile, or ends up, I don't know, stuffed inside a natural gas pipeline or something like that. Now, this, of course, is the fate for, as I said, those who are no longer of any use to US imperialism. And when you're no longer of any use, then if you're lucky, you end up in exile inside the United States. If you're unlucky, you end up, well, in the same place Ungo Din Diem did, which is dead at the hands of a CIA-sponsored operation. Now, Zelensky is probably trying at this stage to barter his way out of Ukraine, is my guess. And if he's prepared to go quietly on the terms that Trump and his team will demand, then that's probably his best chance of going into exile. He'll have some very bad advice coming to him, though, from his handlers in London, who will be saying, look, Vladdy, loved the show so far. Look, don't worry about Trump. I mean, he'll have forgotten who you are by tomorrow. Don't worry, we'll stick with you. The lads there have orders to shoot on sight. Not you, but any intruders. So stick with us. Keep the war going, old boy. Chin up. We've got another season of SES Rogue Heroes coming on, so maybe you'll want to watch that. Might even be a part in it. So stick to the course. Will be the message from London. And of course, if Zelensky follows that advice, then he's incredibly stupid, because London, Paris, and Berlin, first of all, aren't unified on what to do. The German government, well, the current government in the form of Olaf Scholz is trying to pretend that he's seeking a way out of the Ukraine war. Friedrich Merz, the ridiculous buffoon and former BlackRock executive, who is the likely successor from the CDU-CSU, is going back and forth on the Ukraine issue, being belligerent one minute and casting doubt on it the next. He doesn't appear to know what he's doing. There is the European armies and European industrial bases, of course, as we have covered many times here, nowhere near sufficient to actually sustain supplying Ukraine for another year of war. And the Ukrainian army itself is creaking away. There's now talk of potentially Starlink being switched off. I'm not aware that it has been yet. Musk appears to have come out in favor of auditing the aid to Ukraine, which is basically another pistol shot being fired in the direction of Zelensky, because if they do any kind of remotely efficient audit of the aid that's flowed to Ukraine, they'll find that much of it, gigantic amounts of it, have gone missing. And if they're serious about it, they will. Maybe they will be, maybe they won't be. But if they are seriously trying to track it down, they'll find it's disappeared into the pockets of various different Ukrainian power brokers. So this is the situation that we find ourselves in. Trump has decided, on advice from others who in the US ruling class, that Ukraine's a loser. We should place our bets elsewhere. Zelensky is a barrier to getting out. Therefore, he needs to go. Trump wants a deal, so he wants to find somebody in Ukraine who will put pen to paper and get him a deal. Is any of that possible? My betting is still that no, there will be no big deal. There will be various agreements reached between the Russian Federation and the government of the United States. That much is true. Will any of those include a deal on Ukraine? Probably not. And the reason why my instinct, I'm fully prepared to off to being wrong on this if indeed there is a deal signed. My instinct is that a tacit bargain will be struck and be unacknowledged between the US and the Russians over various spheres of influence within Ukraine. The Russian plan, from what I can see, is that they aim to, of course, have the 4 regions that they control now, but it would seem to me that they still favor the establishment of some form of Ukrainian state that will essentially act as some kind of buffer zone between the Western interests that will be perhaps strong in Galicia and their own interests. So maybe a Kiev government will survive along the lines of like what the Russians claim is the original version of Ukraine from like 1654 or something. So, and what you will end up with is that the various fascist elements, the Banderists and the others, will be employed as probably an insurgency in whatever Ukrainian state emerges that is used as a kind of neutral buffer state. And that will probably be run by the British. And they will try to keep this war going in a smaller way, in a more cost-effective way, by a terrorist operation. So the US will back away. They will try to claim some elements out of whatever is left in Ukraine, but they're not getting that money back. And the Europeans will be left to deal with whatever version of Ukraine the Russians allow to exist. And the Americans will walk away, dump the whole thing on the Europeans and say, well, it's mostly their fault. It's that's why we're going to put Ukraine in the EU. So the question is, of course, the current regime, headed by Zelinsky, but by no means confined to him, cannot possibly survive this. It will need to go. And the question then is, will any version of the Ukrainian state that emerges be anything like strong enough to survive the post-war world? And that's an interesting question, given that it'll be a bankrupt ruin that is mainly based around farmland which has been sold off to Western corporate interests. Will it have any capacity to actually survive as a state at all, if any such regime is allowed to exist? These are all questions which hopefully the Russian government has come up with some kind of answer to, because I don't think the US has any kind of positive answer to them. British do. British have an answer in the form of the long-cherished terrorist campaign that they have planned to wage. And so that will be the future that they try to pursue. We'll have to see, again, what the Russians are wanting to insist on. Do they insist on going all the way down to Odessa, claiming all of that coast for their own? Or do they leave an element of that coast to some kind of Ukrainian successor state as a guarantee of good, or as a symbol of good faith or something? Some kind of silly negotiating tactic, which the likes of Putin are fond of. We will have to see. But certainly what will most likely happen is the Americans will offer easing of the sanctions, and they will also say, well, if we ease the sanctions, are you prepared to do A, B, or C? My prediction is that the Russians will insist on, again, the 4 regions plus a certain buffer zone. The stability of that buffer zone is severely doubtful, though. The agreements between the Americans and the Russians will probably be on things like managing nuclear escalation, probably restoring some sort of economic ties, particularly so that the US can get resources that only Russia can sell them. And the broader plan, of course, is to try and split the Russians away from the Chinese, which, of course, is a complete pipe dream and won't happen. But that is the plan the US is working on. I do not accept the formulation put forward by some multipolar theorists. The US has just tamely accepted now that the multipolar world is a reality, and therefore all they want is their slice of the action. This is not possible for them to accept. It is not. What you're seeing now is that Trump is doing the move fast and break things model, and this is succeeding for him at the moment because by moving fast and making all these grandiose statements, issuing all these executive orders, he's caught his opponents on the hoof, on the hop, I should say. So he has basically smacked Zelensky around, surprising everybody in the fact that he's done it publicly. He's overturned US aid and probably the NED as well. Again, surprising his opponents and causing a certain Saint Bernard of Burlington to come out with a tirade on a video he did defending Zelensky, defending the war in Ukraine, revealing what a grotesque piece of garbage social democrats all are, and just what a grotesque con man Saint Bernard of Burlington always was. I believe he also favorably referenced George W. Bush in rant, which I assume was written for him by Chuck Schumer's speechwriter. So the way that Trump is proceeding is that, again, it's the move fast, break things model, meaning that he hopes to shock his opponents into submission. And so far it's working, but it's only been a month. Now, eventually, the reality of the needs of the US ruling class, the needs of US imperialism, is going to catch up with him. This is why I say, and will continue to say, Trump and his administration won't be walking away from Europe. They won't be leaving NATO. They won't be withdrawing the troops from Europe. They will probably withdraw some. They may, as part of some sort of bargaining with the Russians, withdraw a few from some of the areas in Eastern Europe, perhaps. But there'll be a lot of people out in the Pentagon who won't want that, try to stymie Trump. And whether he has the wherewithal to pursue that particular fight, we will have to see. And my guess would be not. The US isn't leaving Europe because Europe is too big a market, too big. The US derives too much of an economic benefit from investing here and also getting investment from here to the US. Yeah, unless you can replace $3 trillion worth of investments a year, then, or 3 trillion one way, 3 trillion another, as I have said on multiple occasions, you're not going to get a US withdrawal from Europe because those forces aren't just there for decorative purposes. They are there to protect US investments and to ensure investments continue to flow in the other direction as well. That's why you have NATO. A big part of the reason why. So this idea that the US is now just going to say, you know what, Putin, okay, we had a good run. It's over now. We will take our slice of the action from the Western Hemisphere. You can have rest. We reached an agreement, and we all sit in our spheres of influence, and we don't try and get out of ours. I mean, that's fanciful nonsense, I must say. It is wishful thinking in the extreme. Because even if we take seriously the idea that Trump wants to call time on the endless wars, wants to call time on the US empire, Trump can't do that. Yes, he could theoretically do it. He could go out and explain things to the American masses. He could issue proclamations. He could say, we're going to go a new way. But he's not going to do any of that. People who are surrounding him are on board with a change in tactic. But the needs of the US ruling class are and remain what they've always been, which is they need, it's an objective requirement of the US ruling class to continue to secure their domination over the biggest and most profitable markets possible, and to continue to expand their control over these. It's an objective need of the US ruling class to ruin both Russia and China and have them destroyed so that they can be removed as potential barriers to US capital export and to be asset stripped. This is what the US requires in order to revive itself. Trump may well believe that he's doing some sort of revival, but essentially what he's doing is a rebranding operation. That's all. People are getting overly impressed because of the actions of Trump over the course of 1 month. If the dollar starts to lose more of its status as a national reserve currency, then you will see some serious problems. Then Trump will, of course, will resort to out-and-out violence in order to preserve that status. Because if the US can't print money and can't continue to service its debt, then it is really getting to the point where it is all over. So the US ruling class has accepted the need to change tactics. They cannot accept the dismantling of their empire. Can't do without it. It's too profitable to step away from. Capital must continue to expand, must continue to find new markets to despoil, new sources of labor to hyper-exploit. This is how imperialism operates. And this is not going to change just because Trump's done a few cosmetic changes. Admittedly, those changes are important in ways he doesn't understand. He's inadvertently pulled the rug out from the US's cultural influencing operations. But again, the US still needs and requires coups, color revolutions, overthrows of governments, and Trump will front all of that up as well. So this is a change in emphasis, change in the way that certain tactics are prosecuted, certain things are done. It's designed to make the US imperialism more efficient and more able to pursue the interests of the US ruling class. Now, I don't think that this will work. The problems of the US ruling class go far beyond, the Ukraine war. Ukraine war is a symptom, not the cause of the crisis of US imperialism. So going back to our friend Mr. Zelinsky, what does this all mean for him? It means that he is now surplus to requirements. The only question now is when does he go and how does he go, not if. And his friends in Britain aren't going to be able to save him. So I'll now pause for comments. So, hello to, here we go, through them bit by bit. Christopher Rogers, hello to you. Grassy Knoll over in Seattle, Washington. Svetlana, comradely greetings to you over in there in Moscow. Svetlana says, Moscow excited today after a leak from Putin's circle that the president has his sights firmly on Kherson and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Interesting. Also, Russia's military community says Odessa is bound to be taken, not least because of the oil pipeline that ends up just outside Odessa at the Yuzhny port. Interesting. In short, says Svetlana, it looks like Russia will take all industrial and mining areas, leaving Ukraine with farmland. Yeah, which is why I don't think the US is going to sign off on that. I think what you'll end up with, if that is indeed the plan, if the consensus within the Russian system has reached the point where they have decided that they want to do that, take all the industrial mining in the port areas, cut off Ukraine from the sea. I mean, that from an economic point of view makes complete sense, because then that makes the newly acquired Russian territory much more viable. It also means that whatever is left of Ukraine to the in the hands of the Europeans becomes an ungovernable and unviable state. Which the Russians would probably think would be very much in their interest. So thank you to Svetlana. Hello to Victor. Hello to Tom Wolf. Hello to Jerry. Hello to R-Worded Samurai. Hello to Comrade Daniel, to DE, James Goblin, who's out there in the once and future Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. Good evening to Irish Partisan out there in Minsk. Good evening to Anthony in Prague. Good evening to Comrade Kate from Tampa, Florida, out there with the Gators. Hello to Albert. And hello to Edward. Edward says there is a lot of talk from Trump, but the money and weapons are still flowing to Ukraine, and the Kiev regime is still saying they are fighting to victory. Well, the Kiev regime can say anything it likes. They're clearly not going to win. The other reason why Trump's talking about cutting them off is, quite frankly, the US hasn't got the money or hasn't got the weapons, certainly, to continually supply them. So they can say whatever they like. Doesn't mean there's going to be anything other than a miserable defeat for them. Good early morning to Robeson out in Indonesia. Out of Robert, who joins us from, is it Long Island? Or is it Staten Island? Yes. Hello to Jawed and to Comrade Ian Foster, to Stephen McKeown, etc. Boor Hava, Agricola Urbanus, and yes, Nikolai Karatonov is one of the performers on the opening track, so I'm glad you all picked that up. Agricola Urbanus says, playlist proposal, there is a German hymn to Stalin called Stalin, Freund, Genos, Stalin, Friend, Comrades. I'll have to look that up. Stanislav Tomov, good evening to you out in Bulgaria. SW Haster, good evening to you out there in Seoul, occupied Korea. Hello, David King. SW Haster says, I hear Zelensky speaks Ukrainian with a Russian accent. Well, he didn't speak it. When he became president, he didn't speak Ukrainian. He spoke Russian. He was raised speaking Russian. I mean, you look at the accounts of some Ukrainians who were exiled, and they frequently accuse Zelinsky of being a Russian agent, which would be bitterly hilarious if it was true. Hello to Bishi Barnaby, who joins us. Edward says, what mistakes were made in the USSR Stalin period that eventually led to the war in Ukraine and Zelensky? Khrushchev needs to be called what he is. He was a pro-capitalist traitor. Yes, that's true. And in brief, like if you read Stalin's own works, you can see exactly where Khrushchev came from. And it was exactly the problem that both Lenin and Stalin were very, very aware of, which is that the dictatorship of the proletariat needed to be maintained and rigorously enforced for at least 2 generations. Again, that goes back to Marx himself saying, to overcome the legacy of the Tsardom and bourgeois society. Within the CPSU, pro-bourgeois tendencies remained well into the post-World War II period. And these pro-bourgeois tendencies were making themselves felt. And again, like it was always the case that these tendencies were going to make a reappearance. In the 30s, they appeared and they took the form of groups of characters in the bureaucracy and in the form of some of the party first secretaries, some industrial managers, scientific and technological people who might have not been opposed to the idea of socialism, but didn't like at all the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat. They thought that the educated and the sophisticated should run things, that the dictatorship of the proletariat should be taken out, basically, should be destroyed. And I think that layer, the middle layers in the party and the state machine, that is where the base of Khrushchevite revisionism comes from. And again, like Stalin and Lenin and later Mao were all very aware of this being a potential for a layer that would see the regrowth of bourgeois ideology, and indeed it did. Unfortunately, due to the losses in World War II, the Soviet Party didn't have strong enough cadres after World War II, and other than Stalin, strong enough leaders to lead a renewed purge of the party, which is what was needed. You had a lot of people come into the party in the World War II period and immediately afterwards who weren't good enough, who were not ideologically and politically developed enough, who were prone to opportunism. Stalin was trying to address this, was relatively isolated actually in the Politburo, if you believe, and I do, the work that Grover Furr and others have done on this question. So Stalin and Lenin were aware of where the problems could come from, and they were aware of how to deal with them. It's just that, unfortunately, due to the extreme circumstances that the USSR had found itself in, and the CPSU had found itself in, there was an inability to defend against a Khrushchev type because there weren't enough experienced cadres who could lead a battle successfully against him. And there were too many opportunists in the hierarchy of the party who'd been elevated there throughout the post-World War II period. So does that mean that Stalin wasn't a great leader, or that he's not worthy of study? No, because he understood exactly what was going on. It's just that he was unable to move against these who were hiding in plain sight. He did make some moves against them, such as his issuing of the book regarding the economic developments in the USSR. But what was needed was an intervention of the masses. In the same way you got interventions of the masses in the 1930s that helped push the purging of the party hierarchy forward, because that's what was needed. And it's what's needed, to be honest, it seems to me, every few years anyway, that you need to get rid of people who are manifestly failing. You need to, in the words of Mao, combat liberalism. And this is something that Stalin, of course, understood, and none of his successors wanted to understand. Backstreet's back all right. Man with the worst name in YouTube comments. I jest, but only slightly. The original intention is that Ukraine will be defeated and not surrender, leading to a draining insurgency for Russia. That's still on the cards. That was hard. That was somebody's intention, quite clearly. I think the bigger thing was that they wanted to be able to present some kind of victory to the Western audiences, and to be reflected back into Russia. Problem for them was that the Russians were too unambitious. They did, like Mark Milley said, that they expected Kiev to fall in like 2 to 3 days. The Russians were never serious about taking Kiev because they didn't send anything like the right amount of men to do so. Then they withdrew as a goodwill gesture, and then we know the rest. So I think maybe the idea of turning the whole thing over to an insurgency, yeah, there's some in the British Ministry of Defence who will be very excited about it. Svetlana says Yanukovych was a gangster, literally. Yeah, not a very good one as it turned out, but yeah, you're right. David King asked, did Newland select Zelensky? Don't know, in all honesty. Kolomoisky certainly did. Kolomoisky, well, he's fallen in and out of love with the US imperialists at various different times. But certainly Kolomoisky's influence over the career of Zelensky can't be underestimated. Daniel says, makes me think of some crappy Sunday Times article by Jeremy Clarkson where he complains that not enough young people go out drinking, maybe because it's not in our budget. Yeah, well, being not officially a younger person anymore, like I can barely afford to like go out like drinking as much as I did when I was like 18, 19, 20. Because back then, like you get a pint for £1.60. Not a very good one, but these days you're looking at £4, unless you go to fucking Weatherspoon. You know, isn't my ideal preference. I mean, that's why most people just buy cans of beer and drink at home, in the British case. Alistair Page McGill says, if Zelensky had been good about peace, he'd be dead. Quite possibly. Alan Smith says, so it looks like they'll lose their eastern territory and end up a US colony, just like the tankies have been trying to tell them the whole time. I feel so sorry for Ukraine's people. Yeah, Ukraine's people have been betrayed consistently since the time of Khrushchev. Khrushchev, by ending the dictatorship of the proletariat, trying to depose the proletariat from its position of the ruling class by coming up with pro-capitalist nonsense like the state of all the people, ideologically disarmed the proletariat and made sure that there would be no leaders emerging who could possibly challenge the revisionist clique. And that proved to be what was fatal in the end. The fact that millions upon millions of Soviet people, the Soviet working class, did not want the Soviet Union to end and were prepared to act to defend it. There was never any leaders. Nobody stepped up willing to lead the fight against Gorbachev in a way that it needed to be fought. They all stuck with like these sort of Byzantine bureaucratic methods. They refused to do what was necessary, which was use any means possible constitutionally to remove Gorbachev and his clique from power, and then have them all fucking arrested, which is what you would need to do. You need to act ruthlessly, clean up the Gorbachev clique, throw them all in prison for treason, which is what they had committed under Soviet law. You could have arrested Gorbachev and apparently charged him and the rest of his clique with treason, just like Yeltsin should have been arrested for treason, and all those connected to them. Act quickly and ruthlessly, and maybe things could have been saved. But that would have taken a real movement of the Soviet masses to do that, and there was no leader out there who was capable of doing that. Because even those who wanted to save the Soviet Union were all these like Brezhnev-trained cadre who not only didn't understand the absolutely crucial role that the masses play in not just establishing socialism, but keeping it in place and fighting against revisionism and fighting against imperialism and fighting against the decay of the system. All of that means a strong role for the masses, where they will need to be heavily politicized and ready to be mobilized against the likes of a Gorbachev or against the likes of a Yeltsin. And all of that was not being done. The Soviet masses were depoliticized, demobilized to the point where it wasn't possible to mobilize them. There wasn't the level of politicization needed to generate leaders who are capable of running that fight. It's just it's an absolute, not just a tragedy, it's a 30-year counter-revolution. No good just blaming Gorbachev, although he is, of course, a man who should have a lot pinned on him. It goes all the way back to Khrushchev and every leader since then. Almir says, I remember Putin in an interview saying he wants to ask Zelensky, why doesn't he do something about the band rights, to which Zelensky has no answer. Yeah, because Zelensky has no ability to do anything about the Banderists or the wider fascists. Because there's just simply nothing he could have done. Not really. They ran the security agency. Zelensky's no revolutionary. He's not going to go against them. So from the point of view of trying to constitutionally exercise the power of the Ukrainian presidency, you could theoretically have the Banderites arrested, but nobody would follow that order. So Zelensky took the coward's way out and decided to save his own ass. Jawad says, did Zelensky just truly realize that he had been played like Putin? Only difference is nation sold out its industrial base and the proletariat to a degree that even Russian compradors. Well, Zelensky's probably realized that he's done, that he's cooked, that it's over. He's just desperate to survive with his loot and his life intact. Whatever happened to Ashraf Ghani, asks S.W. Haster. As far as I know, he's in the UAE, living off whatever ill-gotten gains he managed to steal before he fled Afghanistan. Ashraf, if you're watching, give us a call. We can ring us up, we can have a chat. Good evening to Davey, joining us from Wales. Mo 1917 said he could escape to Miami like happened. Miami Vice style. Alan says, sad thing is he'll be remembered as a hero in the Western media. Yeah, of course he will, but who reads them anymore? You're right, though. If he survives, they'll call him a hero. He's dead, he'll be a martyr. Agricola Urbana says Zelensky was in on the Bitcoin scam. I'm sure all he needs is a USB wallet and safe passage. Yes, Sam Bankman-Fried's crypto scam. Not quite as good as Javier Milei's crypto scam. I mean, that's quite spectacular. The president defrauding his own citizens out in the open. Yeah, I doubt that he knows how to operate Bitcoin, to be honest. I think he do that much coke. He probably rots away certain parts of the brain. He'll have a stash somewhere. Trust me on this one. Right. S.W. Haster says, I can't believe the standing ovation he got from the Munich Security Conference. Well, why wouldn't they applaud him? He's been their loyal servant for years. This isn't a group of people who are making objective judgments, is it? Grassy Knoll says, Larry Johnson, retired CIA, talked with an active CIA agent and they told him that 45 billion of US money has been traced to outside foreign banks and they know who owns the accounts. Well, I bet they do. They have kept track of it. I mean, when you're going to be bribing people, you need to keep track of who you've paid the bribes to and what they've done with the money, just in case that you need to use it against them at some point. So this will be leverage, which they will use to lever out the current leadership and stick their own guy in there if they want him to agree to something. Agricola Urbanus, German says German Zionist outlet Welt called Trump's characterization of Zelensky as an elected dictator a mad theory. It's just true. I mean, he's overstayed his term and he's ruling by martial law. What other way is there to describe it? Basically, democracy is, again, a joke of a word if you don't attach a class descriptor to it, bourgeois or proletarian. But this idea of the who's democratic and who's not, all it comes down to is who is an ally of the West and who isn't. If you're an ally of the West, you're democratic. You must be, because the West is the home of democracy. And they wouldn't side with anybody who's undemocratic, would they? Because they're the home of democracy. Mo1917 says, apparently, Ukraine attacked US oil infrastructure in Eastern Europe as a way to signal their disapproval of peace talks with Russia. Zelensky's playing with fire. Who knows what will happen to him? I hadn't seen that. Certainly sounds like something that some of the Kiev types might do. We'll have to see if Trump will follow through on his threats. I suspect that what the Kiev regime is actually trying to do is bargain for its own survival, bargain for its own extraction. If they get a good payoff and a good exile, they'll stop ordering the attacks. Now, it may be the case that some of the fascist types decide they're going to wage a terrorist campaign against the Americans in the near future because they feel betrayed. That's a possibility. I suspect, though, the British will put them to work attacking the Russians. Svetlana says, the Banderists are not the main threat in Ukraine. Their interests are mostly in Galicia. The real menace is from the larger fascist nationalist parties who seek dominion over all Ukraine, though I appreciate that Banderist is a blanket word for Ukrainian fascist. Interesting. Yeah, so there are, of course, different tendencies within Ukrainian fascism, all of which are equally bad, but there's, of course, a lot of Russian fascists who actually went to join the Ukrainians back 10 years ago when they ran out of luck in Russia. They went to try their hand at building some sort of Aryan nation down there. That Rogue Heroes series made me hate punk music, says Gabriel. Thankfully, I've only ever seen about 10 minutes of it. It looked awful, so I didn't bother. Oh, David in West Yorkshire. Mo1917 says, we're going to see some interesting things in the US now. Trump and the executive branch changing the policy on Ukraine doesn't immediately change the establishment media and talking heads who defended Ukraine and did non-stop propaganda for Zelensky against Russia. We're going to see some interesting flip-flopping here, I'm sure. Well, when they all realize that the imperialist campaigns continue, but this time against Iran and against China, they'll fall into line with that eventually. Almir says, funny how Trump blamed the Ukrainians solely for starting the war as if the Americans weren't the main instigators. Very true. Odessa is where the Ukrainian Navy is based. Yeah, the Ukrainian Navy now consists mainly of sea drones that are run jointly with the British, I think. Alan Smith says, Ukraine is the one issue that you can't challenge on the American left, even if you agree with someone on 99% of things. Ukraine or question Ukraine narrative and the knives come out. Well, fuck the American left is all I've got to say on this. If they can't see what's been done to Ukraine is an imperialist maneuver, then they don't understand imperialism and they don't understand the nature of US power, of US imperialist power. So these people are useless and just best left behind. If a bunch of like MAGA guys can understand at least that Ukraine is a project of what they would call the elites, if the American left doesn't understand that, the American left needs to be taken out and put out of its misery, to be quite honest. Jenny, hello to you, moderator for this evening, says Bernie C.I. Anders. Yes, well, he's in with the AFL CIA, so why not the actual? Greetings to Dr. Ahmed out in Egypt and to Caustic Grip. Almir says Bernie's hero FDR was no communist, but FDR would never have supported fascists. At least I don't think Bernie is now a neocon. Bernie was always an imperialist. I mean, remember, he he supported the Kosovo War. He supported, at least initially, every Israeli war against the Palestinians. Then he pretended afterwards that he didn't. He's opposed really one war, which is the invasion of Iraq, which was made easier for him because a significant section, also be it minority, a significant minority of the Democratic Party opposed it. And given that Bernie is just a Democrat with an independent sticker on him, if some of the Democratic Party goes in one direction, then Bernie finds it easier to follow them. Christopher Rogers says, Ukraine's farmland is some of the most productive globally, and the EU wanted it, and that's before BlackRock purchased WAF's peanuts. True. Agricola says, there are many Ukrainians in Germany. If they get mad, it will look bad. Most are women and many construction workers. Well, I suspect that as long as they get to stay and the Germans don't try and force them back, then any madness from their former country being sold out will dissipate quite quickly. My bet is not a lot of them want to go home. Judith says, a news outlet in Iran supported by Khamenei is worried that Russia will betray Iran to make better deals with America. Well, you can't say that Iran doesn't have a free and open debate in its media. We will see. I mean, I don't think that will happen, but we will see. There's certainly, we have to see if Trump can fulfill any of the promises that he's making, for a start. We have to see what are the strengths of the various different factions in Russia, in the Russian regime. How many of the pro-US types are there still in existence? This will all we will need to observe this and see which way things go. So far, though, it looks like the Russians are sticking with their red lines, and they'd be incredibly stupid to trade in a burgeoning trading relationship with Iran for some vague promises from the US. Now, there are some in the Russian hierarchy, particularly in the Russian bourgeoisie, who would absolutely take that. There are some in the Russian bourgeoisie who would happily take any deal Trump offers tomorrow, but they are not in charge. At least they don't have it all their own way. And there are many in the Russian hierarchy and in the Russian political system who would vehemently oppose that, including the KPRF, of course, who are, lest we forget, the second biggest party in the Russian political system. And there'll be many around Putin himself who would oppose such a sellout, because there's a much bigger project going on that many in the Russian leadership are engaged in than just the Ukraine war. The much bigger project is about the reorientation of the entire world towards the east. And they will know, like the likes of Putin knows, likes of Lavrov knows, likes of Belousov knows, that any trade deal or realignment with the United States is only going to last as long as this presidency, and maybe not even that long. They have been around a long time. They know damn well the vagaries of the US politics. They've been told that they've had resets with numerous US presidents. They know that Trump is ultimately, to use a line, use a line that we use here in the north of England, Trump is often all mouth and no trousers, meaning he talks a good game but delivers fuck all. So the Russians should know damn well that it's not worth endangering an entire project, of which Iran is a key part, for some vague promise off the US. Francisco Gomez says, well, Assad collapsed due Russia and Iran disagree with each other on many things in Syria, a lot of reports. Well, the way I would say, I mean, I'll respond to that in the same way I did the other night. Like, the collapse of the Syrian government principally is down to the sanctions regime and the siege that the country has gone through. I would say that the biggest problem that they faced was the fact that there was divisions within the Syrian government itself over the way forward. And consequently, because they couldn't decide a clear way forward, a whole bunch of them got bought out by money moved around by the Gulf states. So a whole bunch of them turned traitor. Would any deal with Trump make the comprador elements in Russia strong? Depends on the deal. If it's basically it's an understanding that the Russians take all of what is going to be called Novorossiya, then really that's not going to make the compradors in Russia stronger. But they are there, and they need to be taken into consideration. Judith asks, is Dmitriev trustworthy? No. Educated at Stanford and Harvard, worked for this, Goldman Sachs. He was a WEF Young Global Leader. I would say in the case of Dmitriev, anybody with that background is not to be trusted. Remember, as Putin has pointed out, it wasn't the Russians that cut themselves off from the dollar and from US capital. Biden did that. So Biden has been working far more against the interests of the comprador bourgeoisie in Russia than the Russian government itself has. We should not forget that. Alan Smith says it's hard for some people to forget over the fact the Russian army invaded Ukraine. I think that alone constitutes imperialism, ignoring all other context. Well, I'm going to say this as somebody who 10 years ago would have made the same mistake. People on the left in the US and Britain have the political level of a pile of fucking pig shit. We have been raised in the political traditions of the West and so-called Western Marxism to be as stupid and knee-jerk moralist as possible, to not analyze anything, to see analysis as like some form of excuse-making or weakness or something like that. We have been raised to be essentially like to operate on a political level lower than your average 5-year-old. The left in the West is a bankrupt disgrace that's been run by traitors and agents of the state for over 70 years. Trust me, I've been in it. I only started to educate myself truly once I left the left and discovered Marxism-Leninism and started my learning and building my understanding of scientific socialism. As long as I remained in the thing called the left, I didn't learn jack shit. The only thing I learned was failure. So forget the left. Forget it. It's over. It ended many years ago. It's what survives today is a sort of sad, pale, wasted reflection of various things that the CIA and MI6 used to pay for. Forget it. And the best thing you can do to anybody who's involved in it is to tell them to get out of it. Because you just end up going round in a circle, and where the American left will lead you is back to the Democrats again. Because, got to stop that fascist Trump and got to stop those Doge fascists. Got to save US aid. Fuck all that. Fuck the left. leave it. If you're in America, leave it. Investigate the ACP, investigate any other serious Marxist-Leninist organization. I know that opinions vary on the ACP, but at least they're trying to build something. If you're in Britain, leave whatever wretched Trotskyite organization you're in behind. And if you're serious about actually wanting to build a communist politics, then join the CPGBML, because we're the only party that's doing that. None of the rest of them are. None of the rest of them are. The rest of them are a joke, or they're run by the state. Forget them, and forget anybody who's committed to them. These are dead-end organizations. Best left behind. All right, good night to Svetlana, who's going to bed because it's midnight over in Moscow. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for your always intelligent contributions. Sid Hatfield says, people on the left think they're Marxist because they've watched a few ML channels on YouTube. Absolutely right. Judith asked, what do I know about Roy Medvedev? Well, I knew he was an anti-communist, but that's about all I know. I haven't read his book where he slags off Stalin. If you want me to read it, feel free to ask. I'll add it to the pile of anti-communist tripe that I've got to get through. Sid says, right, either start your own organizations, join a decent one, but definitely leave any established wreck of a party. Yeah, it's got to be left behind. This Western left thing has got to be taken out and put out of its fucking misery, or we put ourselves out of the misery it inflicts on us by leaving the fucking thing. Like, you seriously think that the DSA, the PSL, or any of these other fucking train wrecks of organizations are worth defending? No, they're not. No, they're not. I mean, regardless of what you think of the ACP, at least the ACP are trying to build something. Like, yeah, they're going to make mistakes, but I think that many of them are trying to do the right thing. And credit needs to be given where people are trying to do the right thing. And people think that the SWP or SPEW or any of these other like ridiculous trot or social democratic organizations or the fucking CPB, these are anything other than just either museum pieces or organizations ultimately run by the state. That's what they all are. Forget it. Done. Over with. And forget anybody who tries to lead you back towards the Democratic Party or the Labour Party. All of these institutions need to die. Seriously. Right. Okay. Daniel says, best decision I have made in my life so far, ditching the SWP for the CPGBML. And you are, of course, correct, comrade. Good to have you with us. Right. Okay, so I'm going to bring things to a close for this evening. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again on probably Monday of next week. I'm away for some days this weekend. Audio versions of the show will be hitting Patreon very soon. I'm just working on the edits. I may need to do an emergency broadcast if Zelensky gets Mussolini over the weekend. So stand by for me doing a urgent broadcast from my phone in a remote an undisclosed location somewhere. But failing that, see you again on Monday. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and have yourselves a good weekend.